that is a rare phenotype in the online health community. And I thought, wow, this is the kind of person I'd want to have as my physician.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That's like when I say Marek is turnkey, like that's the best way I can summarize it.
I'm quite open-minded, meaning, like, for instance, we got to know each other because I believe I knew about your channel, but I think after I went on Rogan and I talked about, I called it Turkesterone, and I got attacked by your community.
The first thing was your testosterone makes effort feel good. I think a lot of people really identified with that clip from Lex's podcast, and I did like a reaction to that, and I kind of just like talked about the stress resilience aspect and the kind of interactions with the neurological side of things. That was where I saw your stuff for the first time, and I was like, how have I not stumbled across? Like, it's like so overlapping with my interests. And then you made a comment like, I appreciate the clip and blah, blah, blah. And then after that, when you went on Rogan, that's when you like really dived into stuff that was like right up my alley. And I was like, ooh, like this is a good one for sure.
Yeah. And no, it's been great to get to be chatting back and forth a lot lately because after that, of course, yes, I think we both agree now, for the record, it's neither turkesterone nor turkesterone. There is no official pronunciation.
Yeah. I guess technically there might be, but I mean, like, I'd have to talk to somebody who wrote the original literature on it, and maybe they don't even know. Who knows?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And what's interesting is that the online community of people seeking health information tend to latch on to those details. What I like is what I like is how you have a more macroscopic view, and you're thinking, and I'm sure that I misspeak from time to time. I'm a human being, and the fun is learning from one another, and certainly that's been happening. I mean, I think there's so much interest now in things that relate to hormones and hormone augmentation, optimization, and I'd be remiss if I didn't give a nod to your colleague, Dr. Kyle Gillette, who, and I should be very clear, I think that I should have said this earlier, Derek and I have no current business arrangement. It's not to say that we wouldn't be collaborators in the future along those lines, but like I'm mentioning Kyle because I heard him on Mark Bell's podcast, and I was like, wow, this person who's an MD, a medical doctor, knows so much about the endocrine system and is so balanced in his description of it. He was talking about polycystic ovarian syndromes in women. He was talking about TRT in men, age-related differences, considerations. And I just thought, wow, whoever this person is, I want to hear more from him because it's very balanced, very rational, and very thoughtful about different people's goals and situations. And that is a rare phenotype in the online health community. And I thought, wow, this is the kind of person I'd want to have as my physician.
Yeah. That's like when I say Marek is turnkey, like that's the best way I can summarize it in terms of our balanced approach to hormone management. And just it's not like so many of these clinics, like frankly, are just testosterone mills or like ways to circumvent the system to prescribe legal tests and kind of like get bodybuilders the stuff they would have bought on the underground anyways at like a prescription level. But like we're truly like passionate about preventative medicine and helping people identify like unique endocrine disorders and whatnot. Like we've diagnosed underlying pituitary adenomas, like so many things that people have been told by random urologists, endocrinologists, not saying they're all, obviously they're, very good at what they do, but oftentimes you'll get overlooked because you're a young guy with an issue, or there's no way you could have a testosterone problem. You're 22 years old when in reality you have a tiny fucking tumor on your pituitary gland or something. Like that kind of stuff is stuff we've been able to parse out. And it's like, I'm very happy to be able to bring stuff like that to the forefront, because how many times have I gone to a doctor just like begging for like a lipid profile or something basic, and I've been, shunned because I look like I don't know, I work out, so therefore I probably take some shit, and therefore I'm probably an irresponsible guy. Or even just being young in general, they don't want you to even get access to blood work in Canada. Like it's kind of wild. So being able to bring that stuff is like highly motivating and a huge passion of mine, as well as Kyle's, obviously.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of data. I would say that the number one advice that I could give anyone of any age, teenager onward, is get blood work done from a reputable source, because if you have those as baselines, then later if you run into an issue, you have something to compare to. Now, of course, the variable of time is also changing. So it's not a perfect experiment, but in some sense, it's the best experiment you could ever do, because at least you're not comparing yourself to, for instance, if you feel great at a particular age and your numbers are of a particular value, and then 3 years later you go and your numbers are different and you don't feel good. That's very different than just getting a snapshot of a given number. You don't know what to compare to except the reference range, which is enormous and is highly individual. So the reference range that you want is your own reference range. And I think that, and this is what, in science, statistics are always strongest for within subject control, as opposed to, so if you compare my hormone profile and your hormone profile, it's gonna be very different, but also we are different ages, we live different lifestyles, all sorts of things. But if I'm comparing to myself, then at least the variables that have changed, age, location, et cetera, at least I'm aware of all of the major variable changes, what I was eating then, what I was eating now. So you can bootstrap, as they call it in statistics, you can bootstrap and say, I have a feeling it's related to blank. And you can't, there's no time machine. So I can't go back and get the numbers that I wish I had when I was 25. I can only compare to when I started getting regular blood work. So I would say that is definitely worth the cost. It can save you hundreds of thousands of dollars across a lifetime, really. I truly believe that.
Yeah, very familiar with WADA's biological passport they use in athletes. It's like a way they track. It's like, so when they take their blood as well as their urine, like urine is typically analyzed just for synthetic metabolites of certain anabolic androgenic steroids, stimulants, rec drugs, etc. But the blood itself, they assess longitudinal data of their hematology profile to assess any aberrations in hematocrit, hemoglobin, etc., to assess for blood doping, EPO usage, etc. But that kind of thing, like they create such like a minute little reference range for the individual based on that longitudinal data that they can tell when there's any sort of aberration that's even like 1/10 of what is a traditional reference range, that something is off with the individual, that then warrant a red flag for further exploration, which obviously in their context is more drug testing. But in like the extrapolating that for the layman who's trying to assess their health biomarkers long term, I think creating your own like sort of makeshift biological passport with like continuous blood work markers, eventually you can narrow down like your personal reference range to something that's so like minute and specific that when you have like a significant aberration and something that is presenting as like actual, I don't know, like representative of actual symptoms or something, you can go back and see, like, look at this narrow range I've been functioning through for my entirety of my life. And then all of a sudden, I don't know, my whatever is like way out of whack and relative to this. Like you would not be able to do that otherwise. So kind of just like riffing off what you said, like I think it's highly, not just for guys on gear. Like everyone thinks only guys on gear should be, the ones getting blood work. If I'm in my 20s, like why the hell would I ever need something? It's like, well, like if you end up hypogonadal in your mid 30s or whatever, or you end up with some sort of major problematic episode of fill in the blank, like it's just nice to be able to look back and see those snapshots in time ultimately yield a longitudinal profile that is representative of actual like real metrics that you can use as understanding like what went wrong and why perhaps. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, and you can also learn a lot, just like you said, even for people that aren't hormone assisted in any way. So for instance, a few years ago, I learned by tracking my blood work that when my schedule is more demanding and I was under more so-called stress, my free testosterone levels would go up. And I thought, well, this doesn't make any sense, right? This makes no sense whatsoever, right? Everything we know about hormone binding globulin and cortisol, the testosterone ratios. Well, I got to talking with Duncan French, who's head of the UFC Performance Center. He has a PhD in exercise physiology. He runs that center. It is an amazing place. And he said, there are a subset of individuals who their testosterone release is tethered to adrenaline release in a very interesting way. He told me about a study that he had done or had been involved in years ago of looking at skydivers who were excited about skydiving versus stressed about skydiving, and testosterone increases. And, we pieced together a story, and it's a just so story. But during times of more relaxed, times when I'm not working quite as intensely, I actually feel a little bit of a dip. I feel a little bit low. And so I don't get depressed. My testosterone doesn't plummet or anything like that. But turns out some people are, their androgens come through a general activation of challenge. And so this is the reciprocity, as we say, between behaviors can trigger androgen release, and androgen release can also feed back on behavior. And you can make up a just so story where it makes sense, where if you need to lean into challenge, the body would start to deploy things, at least in the short term, that would allow you to lean into that challenge. So, and that's where I discovered the literature, which is a quite beautiful literature, really, from a guy named Mark Breedlove at Michigan State, but some others as well, that led to this statement that testosterone makes effort feel good, because what it does is it changes the firing of neurons in the amygdala and causes the neurons in the amygdala, which most people think are just associated with fear, but are also associated with challenges of any kind. It gates them in a positive way. It links it to the dopamine system in a way, because the dopamine circuits, these things have names, nucleus accumbens, VTA, they connect to the amygdala, and it starts ramping up those circuits so that challenge and leaning into challenge becomes a source of dopamine reward. And actually, I have a new finding to report to you. It's not from my lab, but there's a guy up at the University of Washington studying this in animals and in humans. And there's a subset of individuals who get dopamine release and testosterone release from aggression. Fighting is rewarding for a subset of individuals. And you think, well, of course, some people like to fight and other people don't. Other people don't, excuse me. So so I learned a lot from my blood work. And so I maintain a pretty intense schedule. I'll take a day off every once in a while, but I'm not somebody who does well if I'm just completely relaxing all the time. And I think this, earlier we were talking about sleep and, how much sleep and what sort of schedule to run when you're really leaning into effort. And, you asked at the times when I was most productive, what was my sleep schedule like? And, and in graduate school, my sleep schedule was crazy. I would sleep until 10 or 11 a.m. I'd get up, I'd kind of go over coffee, drink some water, maybe go to the gym, maybe not, maybe wait till the afternoon to do that, get into work. I was up until 2 or 3 a.m. working in the lab, blasting music. I was in my 20s. Now my schedule is much more to bed by 10:30 or 11, up by 6 a.m. or so. And I must say that at every stage, however, it's always been slight sleep deprivation for me, not hours and hours, and occasionally I'll sleep in, but I think in general, I do well in a kind of, I always say you can either be back on your heels, which is not good. You can either be flat-footed or you can be forward center of mass. And I generally feel good when I'm a little bit more forward center of mass, feeling a little bit strained and as if I'm reaching for a little bit more than I can do. That's just how my system reacts well. And my hormone profiles reflect that. Some people are not like that. My friend Ben Pakulski, who's a pretty accomplished former Olympian bodybuilder, he says that, the best bodybuilders are ultra parasympathetic. All they train that short period of time, and then all they do is like eat and sleep. And, he was joking about that, but so I think that there's a range there, and people with that blood work, you can figure out kind of how you work best and what activates you in a positive way.
So there's a lot to unpack there that I want to dig into too. So you mentioned your sleep schedule, and like now your dialed in sleep schedule is